So really, it'll hope to, kind of coalesce a lot of the museums and institutions in LA about the infrastructure and the built environment of the city.
Mm-hmm.
So, the interview that we're going to do now will be incorporated into the exhibition itself. So you'll see on the wall, there'll be buildings and models and drawings and things, and then there'll be ways to, via like iPad screens or small
Mm-hmm.
screens, to kind of get deeper into the history of
Mm-hmm.
these buildings. And so part of my interest is really the development of the city.
Mm-hmm.
LA, and I think the core of our exhibition is, busting some myths about the city, that people think there really wasn't a master plan or a grand plan, or that it's just kind of grown willy-nilly.
Right.
And I think we're trying to show that no, there was a sense of a vision for the city, and there was a handful of people who really,
Right.
plugged away at developing that, and we're kind of had a civic vision, and I know that your father certainly did.
Right.
So to talk, we'll start off, I'll ask you some questions about, the firm in general.
I was going to say, do you know the history, and do you want me to very briefly just tell you, like, my father had a partner, his brother,
Yes,
and they all
definitely.
came from the grandfather and all of that?
Yeah, definitely. And then also, if you start speaking and then you say, oh, this isn't whatever, and you want to
Yeah.
stop and go back and start
Right.
again, it's totally fine, because we'll edit this all, and
Sure.
so.
Right.
So Francois, anytime you ready?
Do I want my glasses on or off?
Up to you.
Whatever you feel most comfortable with. I'll probably ask you to look at some images and things, so.
Okay, well,
You
I'll,
can, yeah, and you can put them on and off.
yeah, okay,
At will.
okay.
Okay, great. So if you just want to start off by introducing yourself and
Yeah.
the date and everything, that
Sure.
would be great.
Today?
Yeah.
What is today?
Today is the,
May 17th.
yeah, May 17th.
Yeah. Okay, just start?
Yeah.
Okay, my name is David Martin, and it's May 17th, 2012. And this is an oral history interview, I understand. And so I would like to start by just very briefly telling you a bit about the history of our firm. The firm was started in 1906 by my grandfather, Albert C. Martin.
Okay, and will you start again and just say A.C. Martin, just start off saying A.C. Martin is a firm, just so we know.
Oh,
Can you start off by saying the name of the firm?
okay.
A.C. Martin is an architecture firm, blah,
Yeah.
blah. Yeah.
A.C. Martin is an architecture firm that is about a little over 100 years old. We've been in Los Angeles since the very beginning. Our offices have been in downtown Los Angeles. We've been associated with a lot of the landmarks of the city, both historic landmarks and some contemporary landmarks as well. And we are, I suppose, at this point in time, still somewhat of a regional or local architect. We have some work in Asia and so on, but our real focus has really been Los Angeles. In fact, my father once said, well, why are you going to Singapore when you can go to the San Fernando Valley? There's more work out there. But we've I think, have been associated with very fine work. There's a cultural ethic in the firm that's very important to us all, that goes back to grandfather. And we have been fortunate to be in a city that has grown and expanded in very interesting ways over the last 100 years.
And in the 1950s, what was the firm like? Like, where was it located? How many people worked there? And how did your father work along with your uncle? Like, whose role was? What role did each one of them play?
Well, the easiest way to answer that is my father was very much an architect and was very involved with the public and large-scale ideas about the city. My uncle was an engineer and he was involved with the engineering side. He was probably more of an inside man rather than an outside public person, but was very inventive, very intelligent man in engineering matters and the like. So the firm was started by my grandfather, and up until the Great Depression, he was very successful in doing a lot of the, marvelous projects. The Depression hit all architects really, really hard. But coming out of the Depression, my father and my uncle carried on the traditions of the firm, and after the war, starting in 47 and 48, Southern California became this kind of marvelous place that expanded in a number of ways, expanded in housing and retail, of the beginnings of the aerospace era, kind of really an era of extreme optimism, extreme faith in the future. And my father and my uncle were very much involved with that. It's interesting to note that we only had maybe 3 competitors. The world was totally different then. Why would you bring in an outside architect who didn't know about the community and didn't know about the character and the planning of the era? So our competitors were, sometimes they were our friends too, but Welton Beckett, Bill Pereira, and Bill Pereira was at one time with Charles Luckman. So Beckett, Pereira, Luckman, that was it. There was a firm, Dim Jim, which is now AECOM, and they were also a very good firm, but they focused on universities and schoolhouses. They did marvelous schoolhouses throughout California in the 50s. That was interesting, and I think that if I compared the competitors, Dad was a great architect, probably very serious in his ideas about the community. Bill Pereira, who was this kind of magical guy, a wonderful personality who was more flamboyant. His work was more flamboyant. And you can see that in all of the exhibits and so on, that Bill would do these kind of great swoopy gas stations and towers and so on. And Dad and we did very serious modernism, beautiful modernist approach to our work. And Beckett was probably more in retail and so on. Again, Welton Beckett, and I think it was his son and nephew, they were involved with beautiful retail work and the like. But when the work came along, we were at the right place at the right time. Marvelous story about the aerospace, because the aerospace happened in coming out of the war. I had always heard a rumor that Cy Ramo was developing a whole series of systems for the aerospace industry, and that he called up my father one day and he said, I'm working out of my garage and we've got to expand. Things are expanding. And Cy Ramo was TRW, which became actually the company that probably put the man on the moon, giant in the aerospace world. And so we were in on the very beginning of that. One time at a cocktail party before Cy Ramo passed away, I went up to him and I said, "Is that true? Did you call up my dad and about the garage?" And he gave me this marvelous story. He said, "Yeah, in a way, it was true." He said, "You need to understand that California was this magical place." He said, "The first thing was Howard Hughes. Howard Hughes was involved with airplanes, and he got the best engineers here out in Los Angeles. And for the establishment back in Washington, it was this kind of crazy world out here where they were making airplanes. And then he said Chuck Yeager broke the speed of sound in 1947. And so the people on the East Coast said, my God, what's going on out there? You know, it's just incredible. And the reason why we got the contracts instead of the East Coast is the TRW, Cy Ramo and so on, they said aerospace. And the Bell Labs on the East Coast, they said, no, we're not going to mess with aerospace. The future is really in developing home stereos. So Bell Labs went into that area, and we put the man on the moon out here. And of course we had, up at JPL and Caltech, we had Werner von Braun and the great geniuses were here. And so out of that, in our work came some fantastic modernist work, TRW, North American Rockwell, Grumman, you know, all of them. We were working for them with this optimistic contemporary architecture.
You know, you touched on the question that I was going to ask before about some of the other firms that were working alongside, but it seemed like, you know, I guess two questions is one, you know, what was your guys' relationship with, you know, Pereira and Luckman and Welton Beckett, but then also if you could speak a little bit about the range of projects that you guys worked on, because not only did you, you know, you did retail and you did aerospace and you did churches, you know, you guys really, so maybe those two.
Sure. You know, some of it goes way back to the history of the city. You know, my father said that, kind of told the story that when grandfather came to Los Angeles, there was 100,000 people here. And he said there were 3 establishments, and we worked for all 3. And I said, what were they? And he said the Catholic Church, the Jewish community, Orthodox Jews, and the government. And you were a member of one of those societies. And so we worked for the Archdiocese. We worked for the Jews were very much the merchants. So we worked for the early department stores, particularly the May Company. Dad got to know Tom May very well. And then we worked for the government, LA City Hall and so on. So that probably, when you look at up into the 50s and so on, we still worked for the Archdiocese. In fact, we still are. That led to the masterpiece grandfather's masterpiece was the St. Vincent's at the corner of Figueroa and Adams, probably one of our best Spanish colonial revival churches. And then Dad did St. Basil's, which is phenomenal. Very special piece of architecture.
Yeah, we'll talk about that later.
And then I've on and off have designed churches. I've been fortunate enough to do that. But then the aerospace industry got us involved with the community in a number of ways. And then we were always downtown. People started building high-rise buildings. We were there at the right time, starting out with water and power, and then Atlantic Richfield. So I think that that kind of level of kind of different kinds of work really came from the very beginning of working in the community. And I think probably maybe a little bit different than today, but the job came from being competent, from your relationships, you know, who you know, it's still true, and having a notoriety, and I think that's still true today. It's just that it was a smaller world then, and now that's probably still how you're involved, but on a global basis rather than just a local.
Yeah. Your father was quoted once as saying, like, the style for the job. And did A.C. Martin have a certain kind of aesthetic?
Oh, yeah, Dad was, and the people he was associated with were absolute form follows function modernists. Yeah, there's no question about it. He may have said there's a style for the job, and there was slight variations. I mean, St. Basil's is much more sculptural and fluid than aerospace headquarters, but it's all marvelous modernism, very well done. We are much at this period in time. We're much less focused on style than they were. That was their world.
Well, it's interesting to see over the scope of years that, that you guys, everything has, you obviously respond well to the client's needs, but that every project seems to kind of respond to that sense of now, It's interesting, it's not like, okay, there's a trademark aesthetic, but it just develops and responds to whatever project is at hand. And I guess that's...
Yeah, I think so. But in the 50s, there was only one way to do it. And it came from an optimistic period of time that the future was very bright, architecture was new and inventive. Now there's people who want to build buildings like in the past or match a context or, with good reasons to do that. I think then, boy, it was one way. I mean, a good example would be you would work on a college campus that may have beautiful old traditional buildings, but you were going to do a modern building, whether it matched the context or not. That was what you were going to do. Now there's a much more of a debate about how do you fit in and how do you create a legacy with a series of buildings rather than, bam, just one building.
It was more of an open canvas back then, or kind of an open...
Yeah, and not always with great results, I would have to say. If you look at some of the campuses, the 50s weren't high points for their for the continuation of the college campus context.
Yeah. What did your father, or what do you think about the development of the downtown Los Angeles?
We always had tremendous dreams about Los Angeles finally becoming a contemporary city that would act like great cities in other parts of the world, always. And we always thought that would come about by creating a marvelous plan of some sort. And some of the great plans that I can remember would, grandfather dealt with the plans. A lot of people were involved, but with the plans for the Civic Center, where you had Department of Water and Power at one end, the LA City Hall at the other, and this kind of very grand mall connecting the two. The plans that I remember more contemporary would be the South Park plan that Wallace McCargan Todd did for a group of city kind of fathers. Asa Call, I think, was one of them that was part of that whole movement to create South Park. So we always believed that Los Angeles would finally come to fruition when some great plan unfolded. That's not how it happened, though, and it's interesting. And having been involved with all these great plans and so on, how it really happened was without a great plan. The young kids moved into the old buildings because the old buildings were cheap. The artists moved in. We brought the entertainment world, LA Live surely was important. There were a couple of ordinances that were passed that allowed people to live in old buildings. And so now LA is seeing its day, and it is coming around. But the energy happened in a totally different way than I ever expected. And boy, it's happened. The other night, I was at one of the best restaurants I've ever been to at the corner of 4th and Los Angeles Street, which when I was a kid, you wouldn't go to 4th and Los Angeles Street. It was just a frightening no man's land. And now here it's just this lovely place where we can see the beautiful old buildings and experience the street life in a wonderful way.
It's incredible to me walking around the streets of downtown at nighttime.
Yeah.
It's such a vibrant place. Like
Yep.
there's people out on the streets, and there's bars and restaurants, and people.
Yeah.
You know, you really. Which restaurant were you at?
Baca Marquette.
Oh, I gotta
Next.
try that.
Oh no, really good.
Okay,
Yeah,
good.
it's a good one. I highly recommend it.
So let's start talking about some of the buildings, and then what we don't
Yep.
cover at the
Sure.
end I can go over.
Right.
So the first thing I wanted to talk about was the May building at the Lakewood Center. And just, you know, this really was like a pioneering
Yep.
prototype. So just give us like the history of it and
Sure. Well, I
you
think,
could start off by just saying the name of the building.
okay, this is the May Company Center at Lakewood. In 1949, 51, right in that era. And that building came out of a couple of things. It was, if not the first shopping center in the United States, it was one of the first. Victor Gruen did another one somewhere in New York, but it wasn't quite like the one in Lakewood. And that came out of Lakewood being a place that was built almost overnight because of the GIs. It was like the creation of a whole city to take care of the new generation of people after the war, and this kind of new optimism. And in that kind of classic suburban layout, they needed a shopping center. And ordinarily shopping, you know, the department stores were in downtowns and all lined up on a street. Here they pulled it aside, had the parking go around it, had big service tunnels underneath it, and it really became a new model for, I suppose, how the suburban world would unfold. That the shopping wouldn't be all in a bunch of little shops anymore. It would be in one big, large center. Now, our involvement in that came out of this old relationship going way back with the May family. And actually, grandfather, the first building we ever did was the hamburger department store for a man named Hamburger, and that family evolved into we're directly related with the Mays, and so it goes way back to these merchants. And Dad and Tom May Dad was Tom May's architect, and they did a lot of work, and that's how our relationship with that family unfolded. And we continued to do May companies on into the 80s, and then we didn't.
Can you explain, because the thing is, I think.
I'm sorry, Chris told me to bring this to you. I'm terribly sorry, but Chairman's in the presentation room and he wondered if you could please join.
Yep. Okay.
Okay,